The credit card statement lay open on my kitchen table like a wound that wouldn't heal. $17,000. Wedding flowers, catering deposits, venue fees, all charged to the card I'd foolishly added Zoe to for emergencies 3 years ago. My daughter's wedding expenses, paid with my teacher's pension and the small inheritance from Donald's life insurance. I traced my finger along the itemized charges, each one a small betrayal. Enchanted Gardens florist, $3,200. Bella Vista reception hall, $8,500. Morrison's catering, $4,800. The numbers blurred as my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. At 62, I should have known better. I should have learned by now that my children's love came with price tags attached. The house felt cavernous around me, filled with the echoes of a family that had slowly, methodically, erased me from their lives. Donald's reading chair still sat by the window, though he'd been gone 4 years now. I'd kept everything exactly as it was the day he died, partly from grief, partly from the desperate hope that maintaining the familiar would somehow keep me tethered to a time when I mattered to someone. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop. The kitchen island Donald had surprised me with for our 20th anniversary. A text from Zoe. "Hey Mom, can you pick up some groceries for us? Running late from wedding stuff. Just the usual. Thanks." The usual. As if I were hired help. As if the $17,000 I'd unknowingly funded her dream wedding with meant nothing. As if I were nothing. I set the phone face down and returned to the statement, running calculations in my head. My monthly pension was $2,800. After the mortgage, utilities, and basic expenses, I had perhaps $400 left each month. At this rate, paying off Zoe's wedding would take me. The front door slammed, followed by the familiar sound of my son Jerry's heavy footsteps. He'd moved back in 6 months ago after his divorce, claiming he needed time to get back on his feet. At 34, Jerry had perfected the art of temporary arrangements that became permanent impositions. "Mom, I need to borrow your car tonight," he called from the hallway, not bothering to come into the kitchen. "Rebecca and I are going to look at that apartment in Riverside." Rebecca. The 26-year-old yoga instructor he'd been dating for 3 months, who treated my home like her personal spa retreat. She did her meditation practices in my living room, leaving crystals and sage burning that triggered my allergies. When I'd gently mentioned it, Jerry had accused me of being unwelcoming and stuck in the past. "Jerry?" I called back, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Can you come here, please?" He appeared in the doorway, already irritated. His dark hair was disheveled, and he wore the expensive jeans I'd bought him for Christmas, back when I thought gifts might bridge the growing distance between us. "What's up? I'm kind of in a hurry." I gestured to the credit card statement. "Did you know about this?" Jerry's eyes flicked to the papers, then away. A tell I'd learned to read when he was 10 years old and stealing cookies from the jar. "Know about what?" "Your sister charged $17,000 to my credit card for her wedding." A pause. Then a shrug that made my blood run cold. "Yeah, she mentioned something about that. Look, Mom, it's just money. You can afford it. And Zoe's been so stressed about the wedding." "Just money?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Jerry, this is my entire emergency fund. It's a loan," he said, examining his fingernails. "She'll pay you back eventually. Besides, you've got the house, your pension. You're fine." I stared at my son. This man I'd raised, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose dreams I'd supported through 2 failed business ventures, and a marriage that ended because he couldn't hold a job longer than 8 months. Who now stood in my kitchen, in my house where he paid no rent, dismissing my financial security as inconsequential. "Where's Zoe's engagement dinner?" I asked suddenly, changing tactics. Jerry froze. "What?" "The engagement dinner. I haven't received an invitation." "When is it?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Oh, that. Yeah, I think they might have already had it. Like, a small thing. You know how Zoe is about keeping things intimate. The lie hung in the air between us like a physical thing. I could feel it settling into my bones, joining the accumulated weight of 1,000 small exclusions, dismissals, and casual cruelties. Birthday dinners I wasn't invited to. Grandchildren's recitals I learned about through Facebook posts. Family photos I wasn't included in because you never like how you look in pictures, Mom. I see. I folded the credit card statement carefully, precisely. And the wedding? Will I be attending that? Of course you're invited to the wedding, Mom. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. As if asking to be included in my own daughter's life was theatrical overreach. Keys are on the hook, I said quietly. Try to have the car back by midnight. Jerry grabbed the keys and paused at the doorway. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might acknowledge the hurt in my voice. Instead, he said, "Oh, and Rebecca's going to stay over tonight. We'll try to keep it down." The front door slammed again, leaving me alone with the credit card statement and the growing realization that somewhere along the way, I'd become a stranger in my own life. I walked to Donald's chair and sat down heavily. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening routines. Mrs. Duncan across the street was watering her garden. The Morrison kids were riding bikes in their driveway. Normal families doing normal things, while I sat surrounded by the debris of relationships I'd spent decades nurturing, only to discover they were built on my utility rather than my worth. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Zoe. Forgot to mention, can you handle the catering deposit for next month? It's only like $2,000. Dad's life insurance should cover it, right? You're the best. Only $2,000. Dad's life insurance should cover it. Donald's life insurance, which had already been decimated by his medical bills, Jerry's last business opportunity, and now Zoe's dream wedding. The life insurance that was supposed to ensure I could age with dignity, that was my safety net for the inevitable medical expenses and care I'd eventually need. I stared at the text until the words blurred. Then I did something I'd never done before in 34 years of motherhood. I deleted it without responding. But my silence wouldn't be enough. I understood that now, sitting in Donald's chair as the last of the evening light filtered through windows he'd love to sit by. Silence was just another form of enabling, another way of saying yes to people who'd forgotten how to hear no. In the growing darkness of my living room, surrounded by the artifacts of a marriage and motherhood that had defined me for so long, I began to plan what would happen next. Because if my children had decided I was valuable only for what I could provide, then perhaps it was time they learned what happened when that value was removed. The credit card statement crinkled in my hands as I folded it one final time. Tomorrow, I would make some calls. Tonight, I would sit with Donald's ghost and remember what it felt like to be loved for who I was, not what I could give. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs, and for the first time in months, the silence felt like possibility rather than abandonment. The morning light streaming through my bedroom window felt different somehow. Sharper, more purposeful. I'd slept better than I had in months, as if some internal machinery had finally clicked into place. By 7 a.m., I was dressed and ready to begin what I now thought of as my reckoning. My first call was to the credit card company. "I need to report unauthorized charges," I told the customer service representative, my voice steady and clear. "My daughter has been using my card without permission for several months." The woman on the other end was professional. Sympathetic even. Yes, they could freeze the card immediately. Yes, they could dispute the charges. Yes, they would begin an investigation. I provided the specific transactions, dates, amounts. $17,000 of unauthorized wedding expenses. "Ma'am, I do need to inform you that if these charges are found to be fraudulent, it may result in criminal charges being filed against the cardholder." "I understand," I said. And I did. Completely. My second call was to my bank. "I'd like to remove someone from my account," I told them. "My son Jerry. He's been an authorized user for 2 years, but I'm revoking that access immediately." The banker was efficient, asking only the necessary questions. Within 10 minutes, Jerry's access to my checking and savings accounts was terminated. The debit card he'd been using for his temporary expenses would be declined by noon. My third call was to my lawyer, Janet Morrison. No relation to the Morrison kids on my street, but a sharp woman in her 50s who'd handled Donald's estate. "Sandy?" Janet's voice was warm but concerned. "It's been a while. What can I help you with? I need to revise my will, I said. Completely. And I need to explore my options regarding some unauthorized credit card use. We scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in my car outside Riverside Elementary, where I'd taught third grade for 32 years before retiring. The parking lot was busy with morning drop-offs, and I watched parents hurrying their children toward the building with lunchboxes and backpacks, the same daily ritual I'd witnessed for decades. My phone rang. Zoe. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately, then again. On the fourth call, I answered. Mom, thank God. Zoe's voice was frantic. Something's wrong with your credit card. The florist called saying the payment for the centerpieces was declined. I tried calling them back, but the card has been frozen, I said calmly. What? Why? Mom, the wedding is in 6 weeks. We have vendors who need to be paid. The final payment for the venue is due Friday. I'm aware of the timeline, Zoe. A pause. Then her voice changed, taking on the wheedling tone she'd perfected as a teenager. Mom, come on. Whatever's wrong with the card, we can fix it. Just call them and tell them it's okay. These are legitimate charges. Are they? I asked. Because I don't recall authorizing $17,000 in wedding expenses. You said I could use the card for emergencies. The wedding deposits were emergencies. If we didn't pay them, we'd lose the venues, the vendors. Your wedding is not my financial emergency, Zoe. The silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, calculating, trying to find the right combination of words that would make me capitulate as I always had before. Mom, you're being unreasonable. This is my wedding. Your only daughter's wedding. Don't you want me to be happy? The question that had controlled me for 34 years. Don't you want me to be happy? Don't you want us to succeed? Don't you love us enough to help? I want you to pay for your own wedding, I said, like adults do. We can't afford. Then perhaps you should plan a wedding you can afford. I hung up. The phone immediately started ringing again. I turned it off. At 11 a.m., I was at the hardware store, purchasing new locks for my front and back doors. The elderly clerk, a man I'd seen there for years, helped me load them into my car. Changing locks is easier than most folks think, he said conversationally. YouTube's got videos for everything these days. I thanked him and drove home, where I found Jerry's car in my driveway and Rebecca's yoga mat spread across my living room floor. The smell of sage hung heavy in the air, making my eyes water. They were in the kitchen, Rebecca making herself a smoothie with ingredients from my refrigerator, while Jerry sat at my table, scrolling through his phone. Mom, finally, Jerry said, without looking up. Something's wrong with my debit card, and Zoe's been trying to call you all morning. She's freaking out about some wedding payment thing. The card was declined because I closed your access to my accounts, I said, setting my purse on the counter. And I'm aware of Zoe's situation. Rebecca looked up from the blender, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the light. Oh my God, Sandy, you scared us. Jerry thought maybe you'd had a stroke or something, making such weird financial decisions. Weird financial decisions. This 26-year-old woman, who contributed nothing to my household, had an opinion about my financial decisions. Rebecca, I said quietly, I need you to gather your things and leave. She laughed. What? Why? Because this is my home, and you don't live here. Jerry finally looked up from his phone. Mom, what's gotten into you today? You're acting crazy. I'm acting like someone who owns her own house and manages her own finances. I walked to the coffee maker and began preparing a cup, my movements deliberate and calm. Rebecca, you have 10 minutes to collect your belongings. Jerry. Rebecca looked to my son, expecting him to intervene. Jerry stood up, his jaw set in the stubborn expression I remembered from his teenage years. Mom, stop it. You're embarrassing yourself. Rebecca is my girlfriend, and she's welcome here. Not anymore. This is ridiculous. Over what, some credit card mix-up? Zoe will pay you back. She always does. I turned to face my son fully. When has Zoe ever paid me back, Jerry? The car insurance I covered when she was in college? The security deposit for her first apartment? The loan for her master's degree that was supposed to be temporary? That's different. That's what parents do. No, I said. That's what I did. Past tense. Rebecca had gone very still, the smoothie forgotten. Maybe I should go, she said quietly. Yes, I agreed. You should. Jerry's face was flushing red. If Rebecca leaves, I leave too. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. For 34 years, those words would have terrified me. The threat of my children withdrawing their presence, their love, their approval had been the ultimate weapon in their arsenal. I sipped my coffee and found it perfect. Your choice, I said. But if you leave, you don't get to come back whenever it's convenient. You don't mean that. But I did mean it, and something in my expression must have conveyed that, because Jerry's confident demeanor faltered. Mom, come on. Let's talk about this rationally. You're upset about the money thing, I get it. But throwing away your family over some credit card charges? I'm not throwing away my family, Jerry. I'm simply declining to continue funding adults who treat me like an ATM with a kitchen. Rebecca gathered her yoga mat and crystals with impressive speed. I'll wait in the car, she murmured to Jerry, practically fleeing the kitchen. My son and I stood facing each other across the kitchen island, the same island where I'd served him countless meals, helped with homework, listened to his dreams and disappointments, where I'd comforted him through his divorce and celebrated his small victories. This isn't you, Mom, he said, his voice softer now, trying a different approach. You're not cruel. You don't cut people off. You're the one who keeps the family together. I agreed. But keeping a family together requires more than one person's effort. My phone, which I'd turned back on, buzzed with another call from Zoe. I looked at the screen and deliberately let it go to voicemail. Zoe's probably crying right now, Jerry said. Her wedding is ruined. Her wedding is not ruined. She simply needs to find a way to pay for it herself. With what money? She's a teacher, Mom. She makes nothing. I was a teacher too, Jerry. For 32 years. I managed to pay for my own wedding. That was different. Things cost less then. Things cost less because people planned according to their means. Jerry was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. What do you want from us? He asked finally. It was a good question. What did I want from them? An apology? A recognition of how they'd taken advantage of my love? A promise to change? I want you to be adults, I said. I want you to take responsibility for your own lives and decisions. I want you to stop treating me like a resource to be exploited. And if we don't, then you'll discover what life looks like without my financial support. Jerry grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. Fine. You want to play hardball? We can play hardball. But don't expect us to come crawling back when you get lonely and realize you've alienated the only people who love you. The only people who love you. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away for a moment. Goodbye, Jerry, I said. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I finished my coffee in the sudden quiet of my kitchen, then went to get the new locks from my car. I had work to do. The new locks were installed by 3 p.m., and I tested them twice to make sure they worked properly. The clicking sound they made, solid, decisive, felt like a door closing on one chapter of my life and opening to another. I kept one key and secured the other in my jewelry box, next to Donald's wedding ring. My appointment with Janet Morrison was at 4. Her office downtown still smelled of leather and old books, the same comforting scent I remembered from when she'd helped us navigate Donald's final months. Janet herself looked exactly the same. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, sharp eyes that missed nothing. Sandy? She said, gesturing to the chair across from her mahogany desk. You sounded upset on the phone. Tell me what's happened. I laid out the situation methodically. The unauthorized credit card charges, the pattern of financial exploitation, the casual dismissal of my concerns, the exclusion from family events. Janet took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression growing more serious with each detail. How long has this been going on? She asked when I finished. Years, I admitted, but it's escalated since Donald died. I think they see me as, I searched for the right words, as a resource rather than a person. Janet set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. Sandy, What you're describing could constitute financial elder abuse. The credit card charges alone. I don't want to press criminal charges, I said quickly. I just want them to understand that there are consequences to their choices. Understood. Let's talk about your will first. Then we'll discuss your other options. My current will, drafted shortly after Donald's death, left everything equally between Jerry and Zoe. The house, my retirement accounts, Donald's life insurance policy, all split down the middle, with Jerry as the executor. I want to change everything, I told Janet. I want to leave the house and half my assets to charity. The children can split what remains of my retirement accounts, but only after they've repaid what they've taken from me over the years. Janet made notes. Which charities? The Literacy Foundation where I used to volunteer, the animal shelter, maybe something for elderly people who don't have family support. The irony wasn't lost on me. And you want to change the executor? Yes, you, if you're willing. Janet nodded. I am. Now, regarding the credit card situation, the bank will likely recover most of those charges. But Sandy, I need to ask, are you prepared for the fallout? Your children aren't going to take this quietly. As if summoned by her words, my phone rang. Zoe again. I declined the call. They've been calling all day, I said. Jerry has already moved out, taking his girlfriend with him. He seems to think I'll change my mind when I get lonely. Will you? The question hung in the air. Would I? It would be so easy to call them back, to apologize, to restore the status quo, to return to being the mother who said yes to everything, who absorbed their problems and smoothed their paths. No, I said, and meant it. I won't. Janet's smile was small but approving. Good. Now, there's something else we should discuss. Have you considered a restraining order? If they start harassing you, let's see how they handle the new boundaries first. By the time I left Janet's office, it was nearly 6 p.m. The revised will would be ready by the end of the week. The credit card investigation was underway. The locks were changed. I had taken back control of my narrative, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I stopped at the grocery store on my way home, buying only what I needed for myself. A small chicken breast, fresh vegetables, a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. In the checkout line, I realized this was a special occasion, the first day of my life where I mattered to myself as much as I'd always mattered to others. The house felt different when I returned. Quieter, yes, but also cleaner somehow. Rebecca's crystals were gone. Jerry's scattered possessions, magazines, dirty dishes, charging cables, had been swept away. The air no longer smelled of sage and entitlement. I was preparing dinner when I heard a gentle knock at my back door. Through the window, I could see my neighbor from 2 houses down, a woman about my age whom I'd waved to occasionally but never really spoken with. She was holding a casserole dish. I opened the door cautiously. Hi, she said, offering a tentative smile. I'm Elizabeth Duncan. I live in the blue house with the garden. I hope I'm not intruding, but I noticed there was some commotion earlier. Raised voices, and I saw a young man leaving with suitcases. She paused, looking embarrassed. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Elizabeth Duncan, Mrs. Duncan. I'd been watching her tend her garden for years, admiring her roses and vegetable plots. But we'd never done more than exchange pleasantries about the weather. I'm fine, I said automatically, then caught myself. Actually, that's not entirely true. I'm having a difficult day, but I'm handling it. Would you like some company while you handle it? She asked, lifting the casserole dish slightly. I made too much lasagna, and eating alone gets old after a while. There was something in her eyes, a recognition perhaps, the understanding of one woman who'd been alone for a while speaking to another. I was just opening a bottle of wine, I found myself saying. I'll get glasses, Elizabeth said, as if it were already decided. 40 minutes later, we were sitting at my kitchen table, sharing her excellent lasagna and my carefully hoarded Pinot Grigio. Elizabeth was a widow, too. Her husband had died 3 years ago from the same cancer that had taken Donald. She had 2 adult children, both living across the country, both successful and busy with their own lives. They call every Sunday, she said when I asked about them. Dutiful calls. How are you, Mom? Are you eating well? Did you remember to take your medications? They mean well, but sometimes I feel like they're checking off a box. Visit with elderly mother, completed. At least they call, I said, then immediately felt disloyal for the comparison. Your children don't call? And somehow, sitting in my kitchen with this woman I barely knew, I found myself telling the whole story. The money, the exclusions, the casual dismissals, the engagement dinner I hadn't been invited to, the credit card charges that had finally opened my eyes to how thoroughly they'd been using me. Elizabeth listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of sympathy. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel now?" she asked. "Having set those boundaries?" "Terrified," I admitted, "and relieved. And guilty for feeling relieved. The guilt will fade," Elizabeth said with certainty. "The relief will grow stronger." "How do you know?" She smiled, and for the first time I noticed she had laugh lines around her eyes and a scar on her chin that made her face interesting, rather than perfect. "Because I went through something similar with my sister. Not money, but emotional manipulation. Years of being the one who always gave in, always accommodated, always sacrificed my peace for family harmony. Finally, I stopped. Cut contact completely. Do you regret it? I regret how long it took me to do it." My phone buzzed with a text. "Zoe. Mom, please call me back. I'm scared and I don't know what to do about the wedding. I'm sorry if I upset you, but please don't punish me for using the card when you said it was for emergencies." I showed the message to Elizabeth, who read it with a thoughtful expression. "Still playing the victim," she observed. "Notice how she's sorry if she upset you. Not sorry for taking $17,000 without permission. And she's reframing theft as punishment." I hadn't noticed the careful wording, but Elizabeth was right. Even in her apology, Zoe was manipulating the narrative. "What would you do?" I asked. "What feels right to you?" I looked at the message again, feeling the familiar tug of maternal guilt. Zoe was scared. Zoe needed help. Zoe was sorry. Or at least, she said she was. But underneath that guilt was something new. A clear-eyed recognition of the pattern. The crisis. The appeal to my emotions. The subtle blame-shifting. The expectation that my love would override my judgment. I deleted the message without responding. "Good," Elizabeth said simply. We talked until nearly 10 p.m., about books and gardening and the peculiar loneliness of widowhood, about children who saw their parents as ATMs and the difficulty of loving people who didn't see you clearly, about the courage it took to choose your own peace over others' expectations. When Elizabeth finally left, promising to return the lasagna dish the next day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the beginning of a friendship that wasn't based on what I could provide, but on who I was. I was washing our wine glasses when my phone rang one more time. Jerry. "Mom?" His voice was different, less confident, more uncertain. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot today. Rebecca and I are staying at her place tonight, but I wanted to call and, I don't know, talk." "I'm listening." "The debit card thing really messed us up. I had to pay for dinner with quarters I found in the car." He paused, clearly expecting me to offer to fix the problem. When I didn't, he continued. "Zoe's really upset. She's been crying all day. The wedding venue called and said if they don't get the final payment by Friday, they're canceling the booking. That sounds stressful for her." Another pause. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening. You're acting like a stranger. Maybe you never really knew me very well." The silence stretched between us. Finally, Jerry said, "So what now? We just don't talk anymore?" "We can talk anytime you want, Jerry. But the conversation will be different now." "Different how?" "I won't be giving you money. I won't be solving your problems. I won't be pretending that being taken advantage of is the same thing as being loved." "Jesus, Mom, you make it sound like we're criminals or something." "Aren't you?" The question hung in the air. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel him struggling with a response that would restore the old dynamic without acknowledging any wrongdoing. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "Take all the time you need," I told him, and meant it. After he hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of an evening that had surprised me. 2 wine glasses, the lingering scent of Elizabeth's homemade lasagna, the sense that perhaps there was life beyond the boundaries I'd always accepted. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Zoe would escalate her appeals. Jerry would try different tactics. They would involve other family members, mutual friends, anyone who might pressure me to return to my former role. But tonight, for the first time in years, I went to bed feeling like I was exactly where I belonged. The siege began on Thursday morning. I woke to find Zoe's car in my driveway and my daughter sitting on my front porch, still in yesterday's clothes, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Through the window, I could see she'd been crying for hours. I made coffee and toast, took my time getting dressed, and finally opened the front door at 8:30. "Mom?" Zoe's voice was hoarse. "I've been here since 5 a.m. We need to talk." "Good morning, Zoe. You look terrible." She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. "I didn't sleep. I can't eat. The wedding is ruined, and I don't understand why you're doing this to me." "I'm not doing anything to you," I said calmly. "I'm simply not doing things for you anymore." The venue canceled. They called yesterday afternoon. The final payment was due, and when they couldn't process it, she dissolved into fresh tears. 2 years of planning, Mom. 2 years. And now we have nothing. I studied my daughter's face, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in months. At 31, Zoe still had the ability to make herself look like a wounded child when she wanted something. Her fiancé, David, a decent man from what I knew of him, probably had no idea how skilled she was at emotional manipulation. "What does David think about all this?" I asked. "David doesn't know," she said quickly. "I haven't told him about the money problems. He thinks everything's paid for. Mom, please, I'm begging you. Just this once, help me fix this. Just this once." The phrase that had preceded every financial request for the past decade. "Zoe, sit down," I said, settling into one of the porch chairs Donald had built years ago. "We're going to have a conversation, but it's not the conversation you're expecting." She perched on the edge of the other chair like a bird ready to flee. "If this is about paying you back, I will. I promise. Once David and I are settled after the honeymoon." "When did you decide I wasn't worth including in your engagement dinner?" The question clearly caught her off guard. "What?" "Your engagement dinner. When did you and David decide that your father's death meant I was no longer family?" Zoe's mouth opened and closed like a fish. It wasn't like that. It was just immediate family. David's parents, his sister. I am your immediate family, Zoe. I'm your mother. I know that, but when did you decide that using my credit card without permission was acceptable? You said I could use it for emergencies. A wedding is not an emergency. A wedding is a choice. And even if it were an emergency, $17,000 requires a conversation. Zoe's composure was cracking. "Fine. I should have asked first. I'm sorry. But the damage is done now, and we can fix it if you'll just—" "No." The word hung between us like a physical barrier. Zoe stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm not fixing your problems anymore. I'm not paying for your choices anymore. I'm not being treated like an ATM with a house attached anymore. You're my mother." "Yes," I said quietly. "I am. And for 31 years, I've shown you what unconditional love looks like. I've sacrificed, supported, and enabled you through every crisis and poor decision. And in return, you've learned to see me as a resource rather than a person." Zoe was crying again, but these tears were different. Angry, frustrated. "So what? You're just going to abandon me? Let my wedding be ruined because you're having some kind of midlife crisis?" "I'm 62, Zoe. If I'm having any kind of crisis, it's a late-life awakening." My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. "Coffee later if you need reinforcements." The simple kindness of it, someone checking on me, offering support without expecting anything in return, made my resolve even stronger. "I need you to leave now," I told Zoe. "You're welcome to come back when you're ready to have an adult conversation about how we move forward." "An adult conversation?" Zoe's voice rose. "You want an adult conversation? Fine. Here's adult. You're a lonely old widow who's driving away the only people who care about you. You'll end up dying alone, and it'll be your own fault." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Donald had been dead 4 years, and she was weaponizing my grief and fear of abandonment to manipulate me into compliance. "Goodbye, Zoe," I said, standing up and walking toward my front door. "Mom, wait!" The panic in her voice was real now. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I'm just scared and upset and—" I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Zoe pounded on the door for several minutes, alternating between apologies and threats, before finally driving away. I watched from my window as she sat in her car for another 20 minutes, probably calling Jerry or David or anyone who might convince me to change my mind. Around noon, the cavalry arrived. First came Jerry's ex-wife, Jennifer, someone I'd always liked despite the divorce. She rang the doorbell and stood on my porch with her hands clasped in front of her, looking uncomfortable. "Hi, Sandy," she said when I opened the door. "Jerry asked me to come talk to you." "How are you, Jennifer? How are the kids?" "They're good. Growing fast." She shifted her weight. "Look, I don't really want to be in the middle of this. But Jerry said there's some kind of family emergency?" "There's no emergency," I said. "There's a consequence." I invited her in for coffee and told her the truth about the financial exploitation, the exclusions, the pattern of taking advantage of my love and generosity. Jennifer listened with growing discomfort. "I had no idea," she said finally. "Jerry always made it sound like you were happy to help." I was. Past tense. He's really struggling, Sandy. The divorce was expensive, and his job situation. She trailed off, realizing she was making my point for me. "Jennifer, you managed to support yourself and 2 children on a teacher's salary. If Jerry is struggling, it's because he's never learned to live within his means." She left shortly after, clearly regretting her involvement. At 2 p.m., David arrived. Zoe's fiancé was a software engineer, quiet and thoughtful, someone who'd always treated me with respect. When I opened the door, he looked genuinely distressed. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "I hope you don't mind me coming by." Zoe told me about the wedding situation, and I wanted to apologize. This I hadn't expected. Apologize for what, David? I had no idea Zoe had charged so much to your credit card without asking. She told me you'd offered to help with the wedding expenses, and I thought it was your gift to us. He ran his hand through his hair. If I'd known she was taking money without permission, I never would have allowed it. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Here was someone taking responsibility, showing genuine remorse. "Come in," I said. "Let's talk." David explained that Zoe had been handling all the wedding finances, telling him that everything was covered. He'd offered to contribute more, but she'd insisted it was handled. He'd had no idea about the credit card charges, the unauthorized access to my accounts, or the pattern of financial dependency. "I love Zoe," he said, "but I'm starting to see some things about her that concern me." "Such as?" "The way she talks about you sometimes, like you're supposed to solve all her problems. And when I suggest we should pay our own way or maybe have a smaller wedding, she acts like I'm being unreasonable." He paused. "Is this why you weren't invited to the engagement dinner?" My heart clenched. "You noticed that?" "I asked Zoe about it. She said you were busy that weekend, that you'd declined to come. But something about her answer felt off. I told him the truth about that, too. About learning from Jerry that I'd been excluded, about the pattern of being left out of family gatherings, about being made to feel like an inconvenience in my own daughter's life. David's face grew increasingly troubled. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known, I would have insisted you be included." "What will you do now?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Zoe's been talking about eloping to Vegas, using our savings. But honestly, I'm starting to wonder if this is the right time for us to get married. If we can't communicate honestly about money and family—" He shrugged helplessly. After David left, I called Elizabeth. She came over within an hour, carrying a bottle of wine and a bag of Chinese takeout. "Rough day?" she asked, surveying my face. "Educational day," I said. "I'm learning exactly who my children are when they can't get what they want from me." We were halfway through dinner when my phone rang. Jerry. "Mom, this has gone far enough," he said without preamble. "Zoe's a mess, her fiancé is asking questions, and you're destroying the family over money." "I'm not destroying anything, Jerry. I'm simply declining to fund it. We talked to Jennifer. We talked to David. You're turning everyone against us. I told them the truth. If the truth turns them against you, perhaps the problem isn't with the truth. Fine. You want to play hardball? We'll play hardball. We're thinking about having you declared incompetent. The threat was so absurd I actually laughed. On what grounds? Sudden personality change. Irrational financial decisions. You're clearly not thinking straight. Elizabeth, who could hear Jerry's raised voice through the phone, rolled her eyes and mouthed, "Amateur." "Jerry," I said calmly, "I've revised my will. I've consulted with my attorney. I've made carefully considered financial decisions that protect my assets from unauthorized use. If you'd like to challenge my mental competency, you're welcome to try. But I should warn you, Janet Morrison has excellent documentation of my decision-making process." The silence on the other end was satisfying. "This isn't over," Jerry said finally. "No," I agreed. "It's just beginning." After I hung up, Elizabeth refilled our wine glasses. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff," I admitted. "Terrified, but also free." "The terrified part will fade," Elizabeth assured me. "The free part will grow stronger." "How long did it take with your sister?" "About 6 months before the guilt stopped being overwhelming. A year before I stopped jumping every time the phone rang." She paused. "But Sandy, I need to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that they might not come around? That this might be permanent?" The question I'd been avoiding. Was I prepared to lose my children forever, rather than return to being their emotional and financial safety net? I thought about Zoe's cruel words about dying alone, about Jerry's threats and manipulations, about 34 years of being taken for granted, dismissed, and excluded. Then I thought about Elizabeth's friendship, freely given, about David's genuine respect and remorse, about the peace I'd felt in my own home for the first time in years. "Yes," I said, "I think I am." Outside, the sun was setting over my neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts at manipulation, new tests of my resolve. But tonight, I was a woman who mattered to herself as much as she'd always mattered to others. And that, I was discovering, was enough. 3 weeks later, I was in my garden when David's car pulled into my driveway. The past 21 days had been the quietest of my adult life. No frantic phone calls about emergencies, no unexpected visitors demanding money or solutions. No one treating my home like a hotel or my bank account like a community resource. Elizabeth and I had fallen into an easy routine of morning coffee and evening walks, and I'd begun to remember what it felt like to live for myself. The credit card company had ruled in my favor, $17,000 in unauthorized charges reversed, with a notation in their file about potential fraud. Zoe would face no criminal charges, but she would also receive no wedding funding from my compromised account. David looked different as he walked up my front path. Thinner, perhaps, and definitely more serious. He carried an envelope in his hand. "Mrs. Patterson," he said when I answered the door. "Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course. Would you like some iced tea?" We sat on the back patio, where Donald's roses were finally blooming again after years of my neglectful care. I'd been spending more time in the garden lately, rediscovering the peace that came from nurturing something that grew because you tended it, not because you funded it. "The wedding's off," David said without preamble. I set down my glass carefully. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" The question was direct, without accusation. I considered it honestly. "I'm sorry that you're hurt," I said. "I'm sorry that Zoe couldn't be the person you thought she was. But I'm not sorry that you discovered her true character before making a legal commitment." David nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say. And you're right." He handed me the envelope. "This is for you." Inside was a cashier's check for $8,500, half of the credit card charges that had been reversed. "David, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can. It's my responsibility. I benefited from that money, even if I didn't know where it came from. The venue deposit, the catering down payment, those were for my wedding too." I looked at the check, then at this young man who was taking responsibility for something that wasn't technically his fault. "What did Zoe say when you told her you were bringing me this?" David's laugh was bitter. Zoe doesn't know I'm here. We haven't spoken since I called off the wedding 2 weeks ago. What happened? I asked her to have an honest conversation about money and family dynamics. I suggested we postpone the wedding and get some couples counseling to work through the communication issues. He paused. She told me I was being manipulated by a bitter old woman who couldn't stand to see her daughter happy. The familiar sting of Zoe's words was dulled by time and perspective. And you said? I said that if she couldn't see how she'd been treating you, then maybe we weren't ready to be married. David stared out at the garden. She packed her things that night, moved back in with her college roommate. And how do you feel about that? Relieved, he admitted, which probably tells me everything I need to know. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Elizabeth's cat stalk something in the bushes next door. Can I ask you something, Mrs. Patterson? Sandy, and yes. How did you know? How did you finally decide to stop enabling her? I thought about the credit card statement spread across my kitchen table, about Donald's empty chair, about the slow accumulation of small cruelties that had finally reached critical mass. I realized I was grieving someone who was still alive, I said. I was mourning the daughter I thought I had, while ignoring the woman she'd actually become. David nodded. I think I was doing something similar. After he left, I sat alone on the patio with his check in my hands. It represented more than money. It was acknowledgement, respect, responsibility. Everything my own children had failed to offer. My phone rang. Elizabeth. How did it go with David? She asked. How did you know he was here? I may have been watering my plants near the fence. Coincidentally. I laughed. It went well. He's a good man. And Zoe? Is about to learn what life looks like without a safety net. That evening, I was reading on the porch when a car I didn't recognize pulled up. Zoe got out of the passenger side, followed by a woman about her age. The college roommate, I assumed. Zoe looked different. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her clothes wrinkled. The polish of her previous visits had been replaced by something rawer, more desperate. Mom, she said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. We need to talk. Good evening, Zoe. Hello, I said to her companion. This is Melissa, Zoe said impatiently. Look, I know you're mad at me, but this has gone too far. David's gone. The wedding's off. I'm basically homeless. You're staying with Melissa. Melissa's couch, in a studio apartment. Mom, I need to come home. There it was. The inevitable conclusion to her string of poor decisions and burned bridges. When everything else failed, return to the mother you'd systematically excluded and exploited. No, I said. What do you mean, no? I mean, this isn't your home anymore. You made that clear when you decided I wasn't family enough to invite to your engagement dinner. Zoe's friend shifted uncomfortably. Maybe I should wait in the car. Maybe you should, I agreed. Melissa retreated quickly, leaving Zoe and me alone under the porch light Donald had installed decades ago. Mom, please. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? I interrupted. Zoe, you stole from me. You lied to your fiancé about it. You excluded me from family events while expecting me to fund your lifestyle. You called me a bitter old woman when I finally set boundaries. I was upset. You were honest, I said quietly. For the first time in years, you told me exactly what you think of me. Zoe started crying, but these tears felt different from her previous performances. More genuine, perhaps. Or maybe I'd simply become immune to the manipulation. I don't have anywhere else to go, she whispered. You're 31 years old, Zoe. You have a master's degree and a teaching job. Figure it out. You're really going to let me be homeless? You're not homeless. You have options. You simply don't like them. Zoe wiped her nose with the back of her hand. What do you want from me? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I used your credit card. I'm sorry I didn't invite you to the dinner. I'm sorry I said those things about you dying alone. The apology felt hollow, delivered like a transaction. Sorry as currency, remorse as payment for restored privileges. What are you sorry for, Zoe? I just told you. No, you told me what you did. I'm asking what you're sorry for. She stared at me, clearly confused by the distinction. I don't understand what you want me to say. I want you to understand the difference between regretting consequences and regretting choices. Between being sorry you got caught and being sorry you hurt someone. You're playing word games. I'm trying to have a conversation with my daughter, but I'm beginning to think that person doesn't exist anymore. The truth of it settled between us like dust. Zoe opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Some part of her, buried beneath years of entitlement and manipulation, seemed to recognize the accuracy of my assessment. So what now? She asked finally. We just don't have a relationship anymore? We can have a relationship, I said, but it will be different. It will be based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. It will require you to treat me like a person rather than a resource. And if I can't do that, then you've answered your own question. Zoe stood there for a long moment, clearly struggling with concepts that should have been basic to any healthy relationship. Finally, she turned and walked back to Melissa's car without another word. I watched them drive away, feeling something I hadn't expected. Peace. The next morning, Jerry called. Zoe told me what happened last night, he said. Mom, this is insane. She's your daughter. She's an adult who made adult choices. I'm allowing her to experience adult consequences. You're destroying the family. No, Jerry, I'm choosing not to be destroyed by it anymore. There was a long pause. So that's it? You're just done with us? I'm done being used by you. There's a difference. What if we change? What if we, I don't know, pay you back, treat you better? It was the first time either of my children had even acknowledged that their behavior needed changing. Then we'll see what happens, I said. But change has to be real, Jerry. Not just words designed to restore your access to my resources. How do we prove it's real? You don't prove it to me. You prove it to yourselves. By becoming the kind of people who don't need to prove it. After we hung up, I sat in Donald's chair and looked out at the life I'd built for myself in the weeks since I'd reclaimed my agency. The garden was thriving. My friendship with Elizabeth had deepened into something precious and sustaining. I'd started volunteering at the literacy center again, rediscovering the joy of helping people who appreciated rather than expected my assistance. David's check sat on my desk, already deposited into an account my children could never access. But more valuable than the money was what it represented, proof that I was capable of inspiring respect rather than just dependency. My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. Coffee date with that new widow from Riverside Elementary this afternoon? I thought you might like her. I smiled and typed back, yes. Looking forward to it. For the first time in decades, I was looking forward to things. To conversations that didn't revolve around crises or demands. To relationships built on choice rather than obligation. To a future where I mattered to myself as much as I'd always mattered to others. Outside, Mrs. Duncan's roses were blooming, and mine were finally catching up. I had work to do in the garden, friends to meet, books to read, a life to live on my own terms. The siege was over. I had won. Not by defeating my children, but by refusing to defeat myself for their convenience any longer. In the end, the greatest victory was the simplest one, remembering that I was worth more than what I could provide, and having the courage to live accordingly. The afternoon sun streamed through Donald's favorite window, and for the first time since his death, the light felt like a beginning rather than an ending.